Deep in the frozen vacuum of space, chunks of ancient ice and rock are hurtling toward Earth at speeds that would vaporize steel on contact. Inside them, locked within crystalline structures older than our sun, might be the answer to humanity's oldest question. Where did we come from? For decades, scientists dismissed comets as cosmic debris, dirty snowballs with no real significance beyond their spectacular light shows. Then something changed. When we finally caught up to these objects, when our spacecraft touched them and tasted their chemistry, we found something nobody expected. The building blocks of life itself, fully formed, perfectly preserved, waiting. This isn't speculation anymore. It's data. Hard, repeatable, undeniable data that's forcing us to rewrite the story of life on Earth. Before we had telescopes, before we understood what comets were, they terrified us. Ancient civilizations saw them as omens, disasters written in fire across the night sky. The Romans called them hairy stars because of their streaming tails. Chinese astronomers meticulously recorded their appearances, convinced they predicted the fall of dynasties. Nobody imagined these objects might be delivering something rather than threatening it. The modern scientific view wasn't much kinder. Through most of the 20th century, comets were considered interesting but irrelevant to the story of life. They were leftovers from the solar system's formation, frozen relics that occasionally swooped through the inner planets before vanishing back into the dark. Beautiful, yes. Important to biology, not a chance. That assumption held until we started catching them. In 2004, NASA's Stardust mission did something remarkable.
Guidance is internal. Roll program initiated.
It flew through the coma of Comet Wild 2, that glowing cloud of gas and dust surrounding the nucleus, and collected samples. Not much, just microscopic particles captured in a substance called aerogel, but enough. When those samples returned to Earth 2 years later, the results stopped people in their tracks. Glycine. A simple amino acid, one of the fundamental building blocks that cells use to construct proteins. It was sitting right there in the comet dust, formed in the freezing darkness of space long before Earth even existed. That discovery opened a door. If glycine could form in comets, what else might be hiding in them? The answer came from an unlikely source. In 2014, the European Space Agency's Rosetta mission arrived at Comet 67P, a rubber duck-shaped chunk of ice about 4 kilometers across. Instead of just flying past, Rosetta stayed. It orbited for 2 years, watching the comet wake up as it approached the sun, measuring everything it could. What Rosetta found wasn't just interesting, it was revolutionary. The comet was outgassing 16 different organic compounds, not simple molecules, but complex carbon-based structures. Formaldehyde, methanol, ethanol, amino acids, and something else. Something that made biologists sit up and pay attention. Phosphorus. An element absolutely essential for life as we know it. It forms the backbone of DNA. It's in every cell membrane. Without phosphorus, Earth-style biology simply cannot function. And here it was, streaming off a comet billions of miles from the nearest living thing. The implications were staggering. These weren't random chemicals. They were the exact ingredients you'd need to start building the machinery of life. But finding ingredients isn't the same as proving they created something. You can have flour, eggs, and sugar sitting on a counter, and they won't spontaneously become a cake. Something has to bring them together under the right conditions. Something has to do the mixing. That's where Earth's early history becomes critical. 4.5 billion years ago, our planet was a molten nightmare. Volcanic hellscape, no stable crust, certainly no oceans. Not exactly a promising environment for delicate organic chemistry. Yet somehow, within a few 100 million years, life appeared. Not gradually, not tentatively, but explosively. By 3.8 billion years ago, we have clear evidence of cellular life already thriving. That timeline has always bothered scientists. It's too fast. Earth barely had time to cool down before biology showed up. Where did all the necessary building blocks come from? How did they organize themselves so quickly? The traditional answer was that Earth made them itself. Lightning strikes in a primordial atmosphere, volcanic vents pumping out chemicals, ultraviolet radiation breaking apart simple molecules and recombining them into complex ones. The famous Miller-Urey experiment in 1953 seemed to prove this was possible. Put some basic gases in a flask, add electricity to simulate lightning, and amino acids appear. Except there's a problem. We got the atmosphere wrong. The Miller-Urey experiment used methane, ammonia, and hydrogen, a strongly reducing mixture that favors organic chemistry. But geological evidence now suggests early Earth's atmosphere was mostly carbon dioxide and nitrogen. Run the experiment with those gases and you get almost nothing. The chemistry doesn't work. So if Earth wasn't making its own organic molecules efficiently, where were they coming from? Look up. Every year, Earth sweeps through debris left behind by comets. We see it as meteor showers, beautiful streaks of light as tiny particles burn up in the atmosphere. But not everything burns. Some material makes it through, settling gently onto the surface. Modern estimates suggest Earth gains about 40,000 tons of cosmic dust annually. That's now, in a relatively clean solar system. 4 billion years ago, during the period we call the Late Heavy Bombardment, the rate was millions of times higher. Picture it. Young Earth, still cooling, oceans just beginning to condense from steam. And it's being absolutely pelted by comets and asteroids, hundreds of impacts every year, each one delivering its cargo of organic molecules. Not just simple stuff, but complex, ready-made building blocks for biochemistry. The entire planet becomes a chemistry lab being constantly restocked with new ingredients. This is where the math gets interesting. Calculate the total mass of cometary material that hit Earth during the first billion years. Factor in the concentration of organic compounds we've measured on real comets. Run the numbers and you get something shocking. Comets could have delivered more organic carbon to early Earth than the planet could possibly have made on its own. By a lot. Maybe by factors of thousands or millions. But quantity isn't everything. You also need the right delivery mechanism. Drop complex organic molecules onto a planet from space and they face a problem. They're moving at cosmic speeds, tens of kilometers per second. That kind of impact generates heat. Lots of heat. Enough to break apart most chemical bonds and destroy exactly the compounds you're trying to deliver. Except comets have a trick. They're not solid rock. They're mostly ice, mixed with dust and organics. When a comet hits an atmosphere, or even a primordial ocean, that ice acts like a cushion. It absorbs energy, vaporizes, creates a shock buffer. Calculations show that organic molecules buried inside cometary ice can survive impacts that would obliterate anything else. The ice protects its cargo all the way down. Even better, that ice itself is valuable. Early Earth needed water. Lots of water. Our planet formed close to the sun, in a region too hot for ice to condense. The water in our oceans had to come from somewhere colder. Comets fit perfectly. They're essentially giant ice cubes that formed in the outer solar system and then migrated inward. Each impact was a water delivery, bringing not just H2O but also everything dissolved in it. We can test this idea chemically. Water molecules come in different isotopes, variations with extra neutrons. The ratio of regular hydrogen to deuterium, heavy hydrogen, works like a fingerprint. Measure it in Earth's oceans and compare it to measurements from comets. If the ratios match, you've found your source. The results are messy. Some comets match Earth's ratio almost perfectly. Others are way off. What this tells us is that Earth's water probably came from multiple sources. Some comets, yes, but also asteroids, and possibly some water that was trapped in the rocks that originally formed our planet. It's a mixture, which actually makes sense. 4 billion years of bombardment meant Earth was sampling everything the solar system had to offer. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Delivering organic molecules is one thing. Getting them to organize into something alive is something else entirely. The molecules are here. They're scattered across the early Earth's surface, dissolved in the oceans, maybe concentrated in tidal pools or around hydrothermal vents. But molecules don't spontaneously decide to become alive. They need to do something first. They need to replicate. This is the central mystery. Life, at its core, is information that copies itself. DNA holds instructions. Those instructions get read, executed, and then copied to make more DNA. But DNA can't copy itself alone. It needs proteins. Enzymes that unzip the double helix, read the code, assemble new strands. Proteins are molecular machines, and they're incredibly good at their jobs. Except proteins can't make themselves either. They need DNA to encode their blueprints. You see the problem. DNA needs proteins. Proteins need DNA. It's a chicken and egg paradox, except both the chicken and the egg are microscopically small and made of carbon chains. For decades, this looked unsolvable. Then, in the 1980s, scientists discovered something that changed everything. RNA, ribonucleic acid, DNA's simpler cousin. And RNA could do something nobody expected. It could act as both information storage and enzyme. Some RNA molecules, called ribozymes, could catalyze chemical reactions, including, critically, making copies of other RNA molecules. Suddenly there's a way out of the paradox. Forget DNA and proteins for now. Start with RNA. One molecule playing both roles. An RNA world, where these versatile chains are doing all the heavy lifting. Storing information, copying themselves, maybe even catalyzing the reactions needed to build their own components. It's elegant. Almost too elegant. But does it actually work? Test it. Take RNA molecules and put them under conditions that might have existed on early Earth. See if they can evolve, adapt, replicate without any help from modern biology. Researchers have done exactly this. They've created RNA molecules that can copy other RNA strands with reasonable accuracy. They've shown that random RNA sequences, given the right environment, can develop catalytic activity through pure trial and error. The chemistry works. RNA can bootstrap itself. But there's still a massive gap between one self-replicating RNA molecule and anything we'd recognize as alive. That molecule needs protection. It needs to separate itself from the environment, create an inside and an outside. Otherwise, every molecule it makes just diffuses away into the ocean. No concentration, no organization, no evolution. This is where membranes come in. Lipids, fatty molecules with one end that loves water and another that hates it, can spontaneously form bubbles. Vesicles. little spheres with a double-layered skin that keeps the inside separate from the outside. We see this in test tubes. Mix lipids and water and they self-assemble into something that looks startlingly like a cell membrane. No instructions needed. Just physics and chemistry doing their thing. Now imagine an RNA molecule that happens to be inside one of these lipid bubbles. It's replicating, making copies of itself. Those copies are trapped inside with it. The concentration builds. Maybe some of those RNA molecules catalyze reactions that help make more lipids, growing the membrane. The bubble gets bigger. Eventually it might split, dividing into two bubbles, each carrying RNA. You've just invented cellular division without involving a single protein or DNA molecule. This isn't life yet. Not quite, but it's something that can evolve. Bubbles with better RNA that replicates faster or makes useful products, will outcompete bubbles with worse RNA. Selection pressure exists even at this primitive level. And once you have selection, evolution is inevitable. The timeline here is staggering. We're talking about processes that might have taken tens of millions of years. Maybe 100 million. The early Earth had time. Lots of it. And it had variety. Thousands of different environments, each running its own chemical experiments. Shallow pools heated by the sun. Deep ocean vents with their chemical gradients. Underground water systems percolating through mineral-rich rock. Ice formations with liquid pockets. Every one of these is a potential laboratory. What's fascinating is that you don't need everything to happen in one place. Maybe RNA replication gets figured out in one environment, membrane formation in another. Then geological processes, volcanic eruptions, tidal movements, mix everything together. Combine the solutions. Evolution doesn't follow a neat, linear path. It's messy, parallel, full of dead ends and lucky accidents. But here's what really matters. Once you have something that can replicate and evolve, even if it's incredibly primitive, you've crossed a threshold. Because evolution is brutally good at solving problems. Give it enough time and enough variation, and it will find solutions to challenges that seem impossible. Like replacing fragile RNA with more stable DNA, or developing protein synthesis to build better enzymes than ribozymes could ever be. The transition from an RNA world to the DNA protein world we have now probably happened gradually. Maybe DNA started as just a more stable way to store backup copies of important RNA sequences. Then it got better at the job. Eventually it took over information storage completely, while proteins specialized in doing the actual work. RNA got relegated to the role it plays today, messenger, translator between DNA and proteins. We can see echoes of this ancient RNA world in modern cells. Ribosomes, the molecular machines that build proteins, are made mostly of RNA. The energy currency of the cell, ATP, is basically an RNA building block with some extra phosphate groups attached. Even DNA synthesis requires RNA primers to get started. These are fossils, chemical fossils, remnants of a time when RNA did everything. But proving this all happened is hard. RNA doesn't fossilize. It's too fragile. The oldest actual fossils we have are from about 3.5 billion years ago. Stromatolites, layered rock structures built by bacterial mats. By that point, life was already sophisticated. DNA, proteins, cell walls, photosynthesis. The really interesting stuff, the origin itself, happened earlier. Maybe 4 billion years ago, maybe even older, and it left almost no direct evidence. So we're forced to reconstruct it from clues, chemical signatures in ancient rocks, isotope ratios that suggest biological activity, computer simulations of prebiotic chemistry, lab experiments trying to recreate the conditions. Every piece of evidence is indirect, circumstantial. But they all point in the same direction. Life emerged from chemistry, not through some mysterious vital force, but through processes we can understand, replicate, and test. There's one more piece to this puzzle. One that makes the whole thing even stranger. The genetic code. The way DNA sequences get translated into amino acids, which then fold into proteins. This code is nearly universal. Bacteria use it. Plants use it. Animals use it. With tiny variations, every living thing on Earth reads DNA the same way. Which means the code was established early, probably before the last common ancestor of all life. And once it was set, it was locked in. Changing your genetic code would be like rewriting the operating system on a computer while it's running. Possible in theory, but catastrophically difficult in practice. Why this particular code? Is it optimal? Or just a frozen accident, the first solution that worked well enough? Some researchers argue it's actually pretty good at minimizing the damage from mutations. Similar codons often code for chemically similar amino acids. So if a mutation changes one letter in a codon, there's a decent chance the resulting protein still works. That's not random. That's error correction built into the system. But it's also consistent with evolution. An early, slightly error-prone genetic code that worked well enough to get life started. Then, over time, selection pressure refined it. Lineages with codes that handled errors better survived. Those with worse codes died out. What we're left with is the optimized version. Not perfect, but good enough to support the incredible diversity of life we see today. Step back and look at the full picture. 4 billion years ago, maybe earlier, Earth was a planet covered in organic chemistry experiments. Molecules delivered by comets and asteroids, synthesized in the atmosphere, cooked up around volcanic vents. RNA figuring out how to replicate. Lipids forming membranes. Everything mixing, reacting, competing. And somewhere in that chaos, a combination of molecules found a way to persist, to improve, to evolve. That combination was the first life. Not a single moment of creation, but a gradual transition from complex chemistry to simple biology. The boundary between non-living and living wasn't a line. It was a gradient. And we're still not entirely sure where exactly to draw it. Once life existed, even in its most primitive form, the rules changed. Natural selection kicked in. Not as a guiding force, but as an automatic filter. Anything that replicated more efficiently than its competitors spread. Anything less efficient vanished. No intention required. Just math playing out over deep time. The first cells were probably nothing like modern bacteria. Simpler, messier. Their membranes leaked. Their metabolism was inefficient. But they worked well enough to persist. And that's all evolution needs: a starting point. Once you have replication, variation, and selection, improvement becomes inevitable. Not planned, just statistically certain. Early Earth was divided into two broad domains: bacteria and archaea. They look superficially similar under a microscope. Single cells, no nucleus, circular DNA. But genetically, they're as different from each other as either is from us. Different membrane chemistry, different metabolic pathways, different cellular machinery. This split happened early, probably before 3.5 billion years ago. Why it happened is still debated. Maybe different environments selected for different solutions. Maybe it was just chance, two lineages drifting apart. Either way, both domains survived. Both thrived. Both are still here today. For the next 2 billion years, life stayed small. Microbial. Single cells doing their thing in the oceans, in sediments, around vents. It doesn't sound exciting, but this period was crucial. Because microbes invented almost everything: photosynthesis, respiration, nitrogen fixation, fermentation. Every major metabolic pathway we see in complex life today was pioneered by bacteria or archaea. They figured out how to extract energy from sunlight, from minerals, from organic molecules. They built the biochemical toolkit that all later life would inherit. Then, around 2.5 billion years ago, something dramatic happened. Cyanobacteria, a group of photosynthetic bacteria, started producing oxygen as a waste product. Not a little oxygen, industrial quantities, enough to fundamentally alter the planet's chemistry. This wasn't planned. Oxygen was toxic to most organisms at the time. But cyanobacteria had evolved a way to deal with it, and they thrived. Everyone else had to adapt or die. The buildup was slow at first. Oxygen reacted with dissolved iron in the oceans, forming rust that settled to the seafloor. Those deposits, called banded iron formations, are some of the richest iron ore reserves we have today. For hundreds of millions of years, the oceans soaked up the oxygen. But eventually, the iron ran out. Oxygen started accumulating in the atmosphere. This is called the Great Oxidation Event. It fundamentally restructured the biosphere. Most anaerobic organisms retreated to oxygen-free environments. Deep sediments, guts of animals, anywhere they could avoid the toxic gas. But other lineages adapted. They evolved ways to use oxygen for respiration, extracting far more energy from the same nutrients. Aerobic respiration is about 15 times more efficient than anaerobic metabolism. That's a game changer. It opened the door to larger, more complex organisms. But complexity didn't arrive immediately. For another billion years, life stayed stubbornly simple. Bacteria and archaea dominated. No multicellular organisms. No complex cells. Just microbes. Why the delay? We're not entirely sure. Maybe oxygen levels weren't high enough yet. Maybe nutrients were limiting. Maybe it just took that long for the right innovations to evolve. Evolution doesn't optimize for speed. It optimizes for survival. And single-celled life was surviving just fine. Then, around 1.5 to 2 billion years ago, something unprecedented happened. A bacterial cell got engulfed by an archaeal cell. Normally, that's dinner. But this time, the bacterial cell survived inside. It kept its own genome, its own membrane, and it started providing a service. It processed oxygen, generating energy for the host. In return, it got protection and nutrients. This wasn't cooperation. Not at first. More like a hostage situation that gradually became mutually beneficial. Over time, the bacterial cell lost most of its independence. Its genome shrank. Many of its genes migrated to the host's nucleus. But it kept its essential function: energy production. Today, we call these structures mitochondria. Every complex cell on Earth, every plant, every animal, every fungus, has them. They're the descendants of that ancient symbiotic event. Without mitochondria, complex life as we know it wouldn't exist. This wasn't a one-time fluke. It happened again with photosynthesis. An archaeal cell engulfed a cyanobacterium. Same deal. The cyanobacterium survived inside, kept photosynthesizing, became a permanent resident. Today, we call these chloroplasts. Every plant and algae has them. Two separate endosymbiotic events. Two different bacterial lineages incorporated into archaeal hosts. Both absolutely critical for the evolution of complex life. These hybrid cells are called eukaryotes. They're fundamentally different from bacteria and archaea. They have a nucleus, complex internal structures, linear chromosomes, sexual reproduction, the ability to grow large and differentiate into specialized cell types. Every organism you can see without a microscope is a eukaryote. Every tree, every insect, every fish, every human. We're all descendants of those ancient mergers. But even with eukaryotic cells, life stayed mostly single-celled for a long time. Maybe another billion years. Single eukaryotes floating around, eating bacteria, photosynthesizing. Then, gradually, some lineages started sticking together. Colonies formed. Simple at first. Just clusters of identical cells. But over time, cells within colonies began specializing. Some handled reproduction. Others handled feeding. Others provided structure. This is the origin of multicellularity. Not a sudden leap, but a gradual transition from independent cells to cooperative groups. Multicellularity evolved multiple times independently. Plants did it. Animals did it. Fungi did it. Even some bacteria and algae pulled it off. Each time, the pattern was similar. Cells stuck together, started dividing labor, became interdependent. Why? Because in certain environments, being big has advantages. You're harder to eat. You can capture more resources. You can differentiate into specialized structures. Roots, leaves, muscles, nerves. Suddenly, evolution had a whole new playground. By about 600 million years ago, the first complex multicellular organisms appeared in the fossil record. Weird, soft-bodied creatures called the Ediacaran biota. Some looked like quilted fronds. Others like segmented discs. They don't resemble anything alive today. Most of them went extinct without leaving descendants. But they proved that large, complex life was possible. They set the stage for what came next. Then, around 540 million years ago, the Cambrian explosion happened. Not an explosion in the literal sense. More like a sudden diversification. Within about 20 million years, most major animal body plans appeared. Arthropods, mollusks, chordates, echinoderms. Animals with hard shells, jointed legs, segmented bodies, eyes. The fossil record goes from sparse and strange to abundant and recognizable. What triggered the Cambrian explosion? Probably multiple factors. Oxygen levels rising to a critical threshold. Predator-prey dynamics creating evolutionary arms races. The evolution of developmental genes that allowed for complex body plans. Ecological feedback loops where one innovation triggered others. It wasn't a single cause. It was a cascade. Once it started, it accelerated. One of the most important innovations was eyes. The ability to see opened up entirely new survival strategies. Predators could hunt more effectively. Prey could escape more efficiently. Vision created selection pressure for faster movement, better armor, more sophisticated nervous systems. Suddenly, being smart mattered. Brains got bigger. Behavior got more complex. Another key innovation was hard body parts. Shells, exoskeletons, bones. Before the Cambrian, almost everything was soft-bodied. Hard structures provided protection, but also structural support. They allowed animals to grow larger, move faster, dig deeper. And crucially, they fossilized. Which is why the Cambrian fossil record is so much richer than anything before it. Not necessarily because life suddenly became more diverse, but because it became more preservable. From the Cambrian onward, evolution proceeded in recognizable patterns. Animals colonized the oceans, then the land. Plants followed, turning barren continents into forests. Insects evolved, then amphibians, then reptiles, then mammals and birds. Each group building on the innovations of the ones before. Each adapting to new environments, filling new niches. But here's the thing. Every step in this story, from the first self-replicating molecules to the Cambrian explosion, was contingent. Not inevitable. If any number of things had gone differently, life might not exist. Or it might exist in forms completely unrecognizable. The fact that we're here, examining our own origins, is the result of billions of years of accidents, near misses, and unlikely events. Earth could have stayed frozen during snowball Earth periods. Life might never have survived. The Great Oxidation Event could have poisoned everything without any lineages adapting. Endosymbiosis might never have happened. Multicellularity might never have evolved. Any of these failures would have left Earth as a microbial planet indefinitely. Interesting, sure, but not capable of producing anything like us. Yet it didn't fail. Every bottleneck, every crisis, every random event lined up just right. Not because of destiny, just because of probability playing out over unimaginable timescales. Given enough planets, enough time, improbable things become statistically likely. We're the outcome of one very long, very unlikely chain of events. And that chain is still unfolding. The story of life on Earth isn't just about what survived. It's about what almost didn't. About 5 times in the past 540 million years, mass extinction events wiped out most species on the planet. Not small die-offs. Catastrophic collapses where 70 to 95% of all species disappeared. These weren't gradual declines. They were biological apocalypses that reset evolution and forced life to rebuild from whatever happened to make it through. The first major extinction happened at the end of the Ordovician period, about 445 million years ago. At the time, most life still lived in the oceans. Trilobites, brachiopods, burly fish. The continents were barren rock. Then the climate destabilized. A rapid ice age locked up vast amounts of water as glaciers. Sea levels dropped dramatically. Shallow marine habitats, where most life existed, simply disappeared. Organisms adapted to warm, stable conditions suddenly faced freezing temperatures and habitat loss. About 85% of marine species went extinct. But here's what's interesting. The extinction happened in 2 pulses. First, when the Ice Age began. Second, when it ended and oceans warmed rapidly again. Life couldn't adapt to the cold. Then it couldn't adapt when things warmed back up. Whichever way the climate swung, something died. The survivors were generalists. Species that could tolerate wider ranges of temperature, salinity, oxygen levels. Specialists, finely tuned to specific conditions, were wiped out. This pattern repeats in every mass extinction. Adaptability beats optimization when the environment becomes unpredictable. The second major extinction came at the end of the Devonian period, around 375 million years ago. This one unfolded over several million years. Not a single catastrophic event, but a prolonged crisis. The leading hypothesis involves ocean anoxia. Large areas of the ocean losing oxygen. Fish, invertebrates, coral reefs, all suffocating. What caused the anoxia? Possibly massive algae blooms triggered by nutrient runoff from the newly forested continents. plants had just colonized land. Their roots broke down rock, releasing nutrients into rivers that flowed into the ocean. Too many nutrients caused explosive algae growth. When the algae died and decomposed, they consumed oxygen. The oceans became dead zones. About 75% of species disappeared. Reef ecosystems collapsed. Armored fish, which had dominated for millions of years, were devastated. Sharks, more adaptable, survived. This extinction reshaped marine life. It cleared space for new groups to evolve. But it took millions of years for biodiversity to recover. The third extinction is the big one. The Permian-Triassic event, 252 million years ago. The worst mass extinction in Earth's history. About 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species went extinct. Life came closer to complete annihilation than at any other time. The cause? Massive volcanic eruptions in what's now Siberia. Not a single volcano. An entire region erupting for hundreds of thousands of years. Lava flows covering an area larger than Europe. The eruptions released enormous amounts of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and other gases. Global temperatures spiked. Oceans acidified. Oxygen levels plummeted. On land, acid rain and greenhouse heating devastated ecosystems. In the oceans, warming and acidification killed off calcifying organisms. Coral reefs vanished. Food chains collapsed from the bottom up. Some researchers think the warming triggered the release of methane from ocean floor deposits. Methane is a far more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. If enough was released, it would have created a runaway warming effect. Temperatures potentially rose 10 degrees Celsius or more. The planet became a hothouse. Only the most resilient organisms survived. Small body size helped. Lower metabolic demands. Ability to hide underground or underwater. Generalist diets. Life that could eat almost anything had an advantage over specialists. The recovery took 10 million years. Longer than any other extinction. For millions of years after the Permian extinction, ecosystems remained impoverished. Low diversity. Simplified food webs. But eventually, life rebounded. And the groups that survived went on to dominate the Mesozoic. Including the archosaurs, the lineage that would produce dinosaurs. The fourth major extinction happened at the end of the Triassic period, about 201 million years ago. Another round of massive volcanism. This time in the central Atlantic, as the supercontinent Pangaea began to break apart. Rifting continents triggered volcanic eruptions that lasted for hundreds of thousands of years. Again, CO2 levels spiked. Oceans acidified. Temperatures soared. About 80% of species went extinct. But this extinction had an unusual outcome. It cleared the way for dinosaurs. Before the Triassic extinction, dinosaurs were relatively minor players. They existed, but so did many other reptile groups. Crocodile relatives, large amphibians, burly mammal ancestors. All competing for the same resources. The extinction removed most of those competitors. Dinosaurs, for whatever reason, were better at surviving the crisis. Maybe their upright stance. Maybe their respiratory systems. Maybe just luck. But in the aftermath, they diversified rapidly and became the dominant land animals for the next 135 million years. Which brings us to the fifth extinction. The one everyone knows. The end Cretaceous event, 66 million years ago. The asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs. This one was different. Not a slow burn like the others. Not volcanism or climate shifts playing out over millennia. This was sudden. Catastrophic. A 10-kilometer wide asteroid slammed into what's now the Yucatan Peninsula at 20 kilometers per second. The impact released energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs. It vaporized rock, triggered earthquakes, generated tsunamis, ignited global wildfires. But the real killer was the aftermath. The impact threw trillions of tons of dust and aerosols into the atmosphere. Sunlight was blocked. Photosynthesis stopped. Temperatures plummeted. Plants died. Herbivores starved. Carnivores followed. Within months, ecosystems collapsed. About 75% of all species went extinct, including all non-avian dinosaurs. Not because they were weak. Not because they were poorly adapted. But because the rules changed instantly and completely. No amount of evolutionary success mattered when the sun disappeared. The survivors were small, burrowing animals, scavengers, anything that could hide underground or underwater, anything with low energy requirements. Birds made it through, though most species didn't. Mammals survived, but only the small ones. Crocodiles and turtles, with slow metabolisms, endured. In the aftermath, the planet was dark, cold, and nearly lifeless for years. Then, slowly, life returned. Plants regrow from seeds and roots. Survivors emerged and began to spread. Ecological niches, empty for the first time in millions of years, were filled by whatever happened to be around. Mammals, previously limited to small nocturnal roles, suddenly had opportunities. No more dinosaurs to compete with. No more giant predators. Within 10 million years, mammals had diversified into dozens of new forms. Browsers, grazers, predators, climbers, swimmers. The age of mammals had begun. Not because mammals were superior, but because dinosaurs were gone. Each of these 5 mass extinctions reset the clock. They didn't erase life, but they reorganized it. Groups that had dominated for millions of years vanished. New groups, previously marginal, took over. Evolution doesn't have a direction. It doesn't move toward complexity or intelligence. It just responds to whatever pressures exist at the time. And when those pressures are catastrophic, the response is equally extreme. Survival in a mass extinction isn't about being the best. It's about being lucky enough to have the right traits at the right moment. Small size when food is scarce. Generalist diet when ecosystems collapse. Burrowing behavior when the surface becomes uninhabitable. These aren't strengths in normal times. They're insurance policies for disasters. And here's the uncomfortable part. We're living in the 6th mass extinction right now. Species are disappearing at rates comparable to the Big Five. Not from asteroid impacts or volcanic eruptions. From us. Habitat destruction. Climate change. Overhunting. Pollution. We're not just witnesses to extinction. We're the cause. And unlike previous extinctions, this one is happening in real time. Fast enough to observe. Fast enough to measure. But possibly too fast to stop. The difference is, we know it's happening. We can see the patterns. We understand the mechanisms. Previous mass extinctions were blind cosmic accidents. This one is optional. Which makes it either more tragic or more hopeful, depending on what we do next. The question isn't whether Earth will survive. It will. Life has endured worse. The question is what form that life will take. Whether we'll be part of it. And what we're willing to do to change the trajectory. Earth's history isn't just a record of extinctions. It's a record of recoveries. And those recoveries follow patterns. Predictable, repeatable patterns that play out over millions of years. Understanding them reveals something crucial about how life actually works when everything falls apart. After each mass extinction, the planet enters what scientists call a dead zone. Not literally dead, but functionally empty. Food webs are shattered. Ecosystems lack structure. Energy flows are disrupted. The survivors exist, but they're not thriving. They're just hanging on in a world that doesn't work properly yet. This phase lasts anywhere from hundreds of thousands to millions of years. During this time, diversity remains low. A few generalist species spread widely, filling multiple roles because specialists haven't evolved yet. Think of it as ecological simplicity. Not because life can't be complex, but because complexity requires time to build. Then something shifts. Resources accumulate. Populations grow. Competition increases. And suddenly, evolution accelerates. New species branch off. Specialists emerge. Food webs gain layers. This is the recovery phase, where diversity explodes and ecosystems regain their structure. But here's what matters. The new ecosystems don't look like the old ones. They're built from different parts, organized around different principles, dominated by different groups. Recovery doesn't mean restoration. It means reinvention. After the end Permian extinction, the worst in Earth's history, recovery took roughly 10 million years. Longer than any other mass extinction. Why? Because the damage was deeper. Ocean chemistry was disrupted. Carbon cycles were broken. Climate remained unstable for millions of years. Life had to wait for the planet itself to stabilize before it could rebuild. The Triassic period that followed looked nothing like the Permian. Synapsids, which had dominated before, were reduced to minor roles. Reptiles, particularly archosaurs, took over. These were the ancestors of dinosaurs and crocodiles. They succeeded not because they were superior, but because they happened to have traits that worked in new conditions. After the end Cretaceous extinction that killed the dinosaurs, recovery was faster. About 2 to 3 million years before ecosystems regained complexity. Why quicker this time? The planet wasn't as severely damaged. Ocean chemistry recovered faster. Climate stabilized sooner. And crucially, more lineages survived, providing more raw material for evolution to work with. Mammals filled the empty niches left by dinosaurs. But they didn't just become small versions of what came before. They evolved entirely new body plans, new feeding strategies, new ways of moving and reproducing and interacting. Within 10 million years, mammals had diversified into forms ranging from tiny shrews to early whales. This reveals a fundamental truth about evolution. It's not progressive. It doesn't aim toward improvement. It's opportunistic. Whatever works in the current environment spreads. Whatever doesn't, disappears. The best organism is simply the one that survives long enough to reproduce. And survival depends heavily on luck. Being in the right place when disaster strikes. Having the right traits when conditions change. Being part of a lineage that happens to persist. Intelligence doesn't guarantee survival. Size doesn't. Strength doesn't. Adaptation to current conditions definitely doesn't, because those conditions can change overnight. This is why predicting recovery is so difficult. We can identify general patterns, but the specifics depend on which groups survive and what opportunities they find. After the dinosaurs, it could have been something other than mammals. If a few key lineages had gone extinct, Earth's history would look completely different. Now consider our current situation. We're in the early stages of a mass extinction. Species are vanishing rapidly. Ecosystems are degrading. But we're not yet in the dead zone. That comes later, if current trends continue. Which means we're at a decision point. We can still influence the outcome. What would recovery look like after a human-caused mass extinction? Hard to say. It depends on what survives. If large mammals disappear, something else will eventually fill those roles. Maybe birds. Maybe reptiles. Maybe something unexpected. Evolution doesn't care about our preferences. If humans disappeared tomorrow, Earth would recover. It might take millions of years, but diversity would return. New species would evolve. Ecosystems would rebuild. The planet has done this before, multiple times. It's resilient in ways that individual species aren't. But that's not a comforting thought. Because from our perspective, recovery after our extinction wouldn't include us. We'd be a thin layer in the fossil record. Evidence of a species that emerged, dominated briefly, then vanished. Just like the dinosaurs. Just like the trilobites. Just like thousands of other lineages that once seemed permanent. The real question isn't whether Earth will recover. It's whether we want to be part of that recovery. Whether we're willing to change our behavior to remain part of the story. Because unlike previous mass extinctions, this one comes with awareness. We understand what's happening. We can measure it. We can model future scenarios. We have knowledge that no species has ever possessed before. That knowledge creates responsibility. Not moral responsibility in some abstract sense, but practical responsibility. We're causing changes that will determine which species persist and which don't. Including possibly our own. And unlike an asteroid impact, these changes are gradual enough that we can respond. If we choose to. But here's the hard part. Responding effectively requires acting against immediate self-interest. Preserving habitat means not developing land. Reducing emissions means changing energy systems. Limiting consumption means accepting less material wealth. These aren't easy choices. They're not even obviously rational from an individual perspective. Yet they're necessary from a species perspective. From an ecosystem perspective. From a long-term survival perspective. The same perspective that matters when you're looking at geological timescales and extinction patterns. Because on those timescales, short-term gains vanish. Only persistence matters. Only what survives long enough to leave descendants. This is where human intelligence becomes either our greatest asset or our fatal flaw. We can understand long-term consequences in ways other species can't. We can plan beyond our own lifetimes. We can coordinate globally. But we can also rationalize inaction. Prioritize immediate comfort. Assume someone else will solve the problem. Other species don't face this dilemma. They can't choose to prevent extinction. They simply respond to immediate pressures, and either their traits work or they don't. Humans are the first species capable of consciously deciding whether to alter our trajectory. Whether to use our intelligence to ensure our persistence. The fossil record shows that dominance is temporary. Every group that once ruled eventually declined. Trilobites dominated for 270 million years, then vanished. Dinosaurs lasted 165 million years, then disappeared. humans have existed for maybe 300,000 years. We've been technologically advanced for less than 10,000. We're newcomers. And newcomers don't have track records of stability. What we do have is unprecedented power. Power to reshape ecosystems. Power to drive climate change. Power to cause extinctions at rates comparable to asteroid impacts. That power doesn't make us immune to extinction. It makes us capable of causing our own. The patterns from previous mass extinctions suggest what might happen next. If we continue current trends, diversity will decline. Ecosystems will simplify. Specialist species will disappear first. Then larger species. Then anything requiring stable conditions. Eventually, we reach a threshold where ecosystems can't provide the services we depend on. Clean water. Stable climate. Pollination. Soil formation. Food production. At that point, human civilization becomes unsustainable. Not because we lack technology, but because the biological foundation collapses. We can't engineer our way out of ecosystem failure. We depend on functional ecosystems the same way every other species does. Remove enough pieces, and the whole structure falls apart. This isn't speculation. It's pattern recognition. Every mass extinction followed similar trajectories. Stress accumulates. Systems become fragile. A final trigger causes collapse. The only difference now is we can see it coming. We have data. Models. Projections. We know which actions accelerate the problem and which might slow it. Whether we act on that knowledge determines what the next few million years look like. Whether the Anthropocene becomes a brief anomaly or a major extinction event. Whether humans persist or become another fossil layer. Whether intelligence, our defining trait, proves adaptive or maladaptive on evolutionary timescales. The answer isn't predetermined. Evolution doesn't script outcomes. It responds to conditions. And conditions, for the first time in Earth's history, are partially under the control of one species. That's never happened before. We don't have precedent for a species consciously shaping its own evolutionary future. Which makes this moment unique. Not just in human history, but in planetary history. We're the first species capable of understanding mass extinctions while potentially causing one. The first that can choose whether to continue down that path. The first with enough knowledge to know better and enough power to do something about it. What we do next matters. Not because the universe cares. Not because Earth cares. But because we care. Because we're capable of caring about things beyond our immediate survival. About other species. About future generations. About whether the story continues or ends with us. That capacity for long-term thinking is either our salvation or our epitaph. And we're in the process of finding out which. Looking back at the fossil record reveals something unsettling. Intelligence rarely appears as a survival trait. Most successful lineages, the ones lasting tens or hundreds of millions of years, rely on simplicity. Bacteria, jellyfish, crocodiles. They don't solve problems. They persist through durability. Intelligence is expensive. It requires large brains, extended development periods, high energy intake. For most of Earth's history, those costs outweighed the benefits. Only in specific circumstances, environments demanding flexibility and learning, did intelligence become advantageous. And even then, it remained rare. Out of billions of species across 4 billion years, only one developed technology. That's not a sign of inevitability. It's statistical noise. Which raises a question. If intelligence is so rare and so costly, what happens when it creates problems faster than it solves them? When the very trait that enabled survival becomes the mechanism of decline? We're testing that now. Human intelligence produced agriculture, medicine, technology. It extended lifespans, reduced infant mortality, enabled population growth beyond any precedent. But it also produced weapons capable of ending civilization in hours. Pollution that persists for millennia. Climate disruption that compounds across decades. We're intelligent enough to create these problems. Whether we're intelligent enough to solve them remains unproven. And the clock is running. Not in human time, where decades feel long. In geological time, where our entire civilization is a blink. If we disappeared tomorrow, future geologists would find a thin layer marking our existence. Plastics, concrete, radioisotopes, a brief spike in carbon isotopes, then silence. The planet would continue. Life would recover. It always does. Not the same life, not the same ecosystems, but something. Earth doesn't need humans. We need Earth. That asymmetry matters. We talk about saving the planet, but that's backwards. The planet will be fine. It survived 5 mass extinctions, supervolcano eruptions, asteroid impacts, ice ages, hothouse climates. It'll survive us. What we're actually trying to save is ourselves. Our way of life. The stable conditions we evolved to exploit. Those conditions aren't guaranteed. They're contingent on systems we're actively destabilizing. And once those systems cross certain thresholds, they don't snap back. They reorganize around new equilibria. Equilibria that might not include industrial civilization or large human populations or humans at all. That possibility should focus attention. Because unlike previous species facing extinction, we can see it coming. We have data showing ocean acidification rates, temperature projections, biodiversity decline curves, ecosystem collapse timelines. We know where current trajectories lead. And yet, knowing doesn't guarantee action. Information alone never changes behavior. If it did, everyone would exercise, save money, avoid processed food. But knowing what's good for us and doing it are different things. The gap between knowledge and action defines the human condition. And right now, that gap is widening. We know fossil fuels drive climate change. We keep burning them. We know industrial agriculture depletes soil. We keep expanding it. We know overfishing collapses stocks. We keep fishing. Not because we're stupid. Because short-term incentives override long-term consequences. Because individual rationality produces collective irrationality. Because the benefits of harmful actions accrue to individuals while the costs distribute across everyone. That's not a moral failing. It's a structural problem. And structural problems require structural solutions. Individual action matters, but it's insufficient. Recycling, reducing consumption, changing diet, all positive steps. But they don't address the underlying systems driving ecosystem collapse. Those systems, energy infrastructure, agricultural practices, economic incentives, require coordinated policy changes. Which requires political will. Which requires public pressure. Which requires enough people caring enough to demand change. And that's where we are. In a narrow window where the trajectory is set but not locked. Where the momentum is strong but not irreversible. Where outcomes remain uncertain because they depend on choices not yet made. This moment won't last. Windows close. Systems reach tipping points. Momentum becomes irreversible. The question is whether we recognize the moment while we're in it. Whether we understand that what feels like normal is actually unprecedented. That the stability we take for granted is historically anomalous. That the future isn't guaranteed to resemble the past. Because it won't. The planet we're creating will be fundamentally different from the one we inherited. Hotter. Less biodiverse. Less stable. Whether it remains habitable for billions of humans depends entirely on how much hotter, how much less diverse, how much less stable. Those aren't abstract variables. They're outcomes of specific decisions. Energy policy. Land use. Consumption patterns. Trade agreements. Infrastructure investments. Decisions being made now, today, by governments, corporations, individuals. Each decision moves the needle. Slightly. Incrementally. But cumulatively, they determine trajectory. And trajectory determines destination. We like to think we're separate from nature. That technology insulates us from ecological limits. That intelligence exempts us from evolutionary pressures. But we're not separate. We're embedded. We breathe the same air. Drink the same water. Depend on the same ecosystem services as every other organism. Our cities, Our technology, our entire civilization rests on a foundation of functional ecosystems. Remove that foundation and everything collapses. Not might collapse. Will collapse. It's physics. You can't support a structure after removing its base. And we're systematically removing the base. Deforestation. Ocean acidification. Soil depletion. Aquifer exhaustion. Pollinator decline. Each one weakens the foundation. Each one moves us closer to structural failure. We're not facing one problem. We're facing interconnected system failures happening simultaneously. Climate change amplifies species extinction. Species extinction reduces ecosystem resilience. Reduced resilience accelerates climate impacts. Feedback loops compound. Tipping points cascade. And suddenly, gradual change becomes rapid collapse. That's how complex systems fail. Slowly, then all at once. The challenge is acting during the slow phase. When problems seem manageable. When denial remains plausible. When short-term costs feel more real than long-term consequences. Acting requires overriding our evolutionary programming. We evolved for immediate threats. Predators. Starvation. Injury. Our brains are wired for rapid response to visible danger. But climate change isn't a predator. It's a statistical shift. A gradual accumulation. A probability distribution changing shape. Our brains aren't built to process that. We don't feel threatened by parts per million. By decimal point temperature increases. By percentage changes in biodiversity. We feel threatened by things with teeth. By things that can hurt us now. Which is why this is hard. Why knowing isn't enough. Why information doesn't automatically translate to action. We're asking people to respond emotionally to spreadsheets. To feel urgency about graphs. To sacrifice immediate comfort for abstract future benefits. That's not how humans work. But it's what the situation requires. Which means we need to change how we work. Not our biology, that's too slow. But our systems. Our institutions. Our decision-making frameworks. We need structures that account for long-term consequences. That price in externalities. That prioritize sustainability over quarterly profits. That value ecosystem health over GDP growth. Those structures don't exist by default. They require intentional design. Political will. Social pressure. Cultural shifts. They require enough people demanding something different. Enough people recognizing that current systems are driving us toward collapse. Enough people willing to support changes that might be personally inconvenient but collectively necessary. And that's the real test. Not whether we can develop solutions, We have solutions. Renewable energy, regenerative agriculture, circular economies, ecosystem restoration. The technology exists. The knowledge exists. What's missing is implementation at scale. What's missing is political and economic systems that prioritize long-term survival over short-term extraction. What's missing is collective willingness to accept that infinite growth on a finite planet is mathematically impossible. That's the hard part. Not the science. Not the engineering. The acceptance that our current trajectory is unsustainable. That something has to change. That we can't keep doing what we're doing and expect different results. And we're running out of time to figure this out. Not in a dramatic, countdown clock way, but in the sense that every year of delay makes the problem harder. Every ton of carbon emitted stays in the atmosphere for decades. Every species lost is gone permanently. Every ecosystem threshold crossed is effectively irreversible on human timescales. We're making decisions now that will echo for thousands of years. Decisions about what kind of planet we leave behind. What kind of future we're creating. Whether intelligence, our defining characteristic, proves adaptive or catastrophic. The answer isn't written yet. We're writing it. Right now. Through choices large and small. Through policies and purchases. Through what we demand and what we accept. Through whether we treat this as an emergency or a distant concern. Evolution doesn't care which we choose. It'll respond to whatever conditions we create. It'll favor whatever traits prove adaptive in the world we're building. Maybe that world includes humans. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe intelligence remains advantageous. Maybe it becomes a liability. Maybe we're the ancestors of something extraordinary. Maybe we're just another failed experiment. Another branch that couldn't adapt fast enough. Another fossil layer marking a brief moment when one species thought it could outsmart 4 billion years of planetary processes. We won't know the answer for millions of years. But we're determining it now. Part 6 of 6. The story we've been told about comets, the one where they're just icy debris wandering through space, needs updating. Because the data keeps pointing in one direction. These objects aren't random. They're delivery systems. Packages sent from the outer solar system carrying exactly what early Earth needed but couldn't make efficiently on its own. Think about the timing. Earth forms hot. Too hot for organic chemistry. It needs to cool, needs water, needs the building blocks for biochemistry. And right on schedule, here come the comets. Billions of them during the late heavy bombardment. Each one carrying ice, organics, amino acids, phosphorus. Each impact a delivery. Not violent destruction, but violent creation. We've spent decades assuming life started here through local chemistry. Lightning strikes. Volcanic vents. Tidal pools. And maybe some of it did. But the numbers don't work. Early Earth's atmosphere wasn't right for making complex organics in quantity. The Miller-Urey experiment, elegant as it was, used the wrong gases. When you correct for that, the yield drops dramatically. Local production wasn't enough. But comets? They're making organics constantly. In the cold dark between stars. No atmosphere to worry about. No oxygen to interfere. Just carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and time. Lots of time. These molecules form, accumulate, get locked into ice matrices that protect them. Then they wait. Sometimes for billions of years. Until gravity pulls them inward. Until they slam into young planets. Until they deliver their cargo. What we found on Wild 2 and 67P isn't an accident. It's a pattern. Comets everywhere are doing this. Making the same molecules. Carrying the same building blocks. It's chemistry operating at solar system scale. And Earth was in the path of that delivery route for hundreds of millions of years. The ice itself mattered just as much as what was in it. Early Earth needed water. Vast amounts. Our oceans didn't condense from the primordial atmosphere. They came from outside. From objects that formed in colder regions and then migrated inward. Some from asteroids, yes. But comets contributed. Isotope ratios prove it. Not all our water is cometary, but some is. Enough to matter. So now picture the actual scenario. 4 billion years ago. Earth with thin oceans, no continents yet, active volcanism everywhere. And it's being bombarded constantly. Not planet-killing impacts, but steady, relentless delivery. Each comet brings water, organics, minerals. The ice cushions the impact, protects the cargo. The organics survive, dissolve into the ocean, accumulate. The minerals settle. The carbon compounds concentrate in tidal zones, around vents, in shallow pools. You're not starting with nothing. You're starting with a planet being continuously restocked with prebiotic chemistry. With molecules that already have some complexity. With building blocks ready to assemble into something more sophisticated. The local chemistry, the lightning and vents and UV radiation, they're still happening. But now they're working with better raw materials. They're not creating from scratch. They're refining what's already there. And here's what makes this profound. It means life's origin isn't purely local. It's not Earth solving the problem alone. It's Earth benefiting from processes that happened across the entire solar system. From chemistry in molecular clouds. From reactions in the outer solar system. From delivery mechanisms that operated for hundreds of millions of years. Life's origin is a collaboration between a planet and its cosmic environment. Which raises an obvious question. If this happened here, did it happen elsewhere? Are there other planets, right now, being seeded by comets? Other oceans accumulating organic molecules? Other worlds where chemistry is transitioning toward biology? We don't know. But the statistics suggest yes. Our solar system isn't unique. Comets form around other stars. Planets get bombarded everywhere. The same physical processes, the same chemistry, the same delivery mechanisms. If it worked once, it can work again. Maybe it's working right now on planets we haven't discovered yet. Maybe it's worked countless times on worlds that existed billions of years ago. Maybe we're not the first. Maybe we won't be the last. That doesn't make life inevitable. Chemistry alone doesn't guarantee biology. You need the right conditions, the right timing, the right sequence of events. But it makes life less miraculous, less impossibly unlikely. It shifts the question from, how did life beat astronomical odds? To, given favorable conditions and enough time, how often does chemistry become biology? And that's a different question. One with potentially different answers. Because chemistry is patient. It doesn't care about timescales. It just keeps trying combinations. Keep mixing molecules for a billion years and eventually something interesting happens. Not guaranteed, but probable. And probability, given enough opportunities, approaches certainty. We're still missing pieces. We don't know exactly how RNA formed, how membranes and replication combined, how the genetic code got established. Those are hard problems, but they're becoming tractable. Every year, lab experiments get closer to recreating conditions that produce self-replicating systems. Every year, we understand more about what early Earth was actually like. Every year, the gap between non-life and life gets smaller. Comets didn't solve the origin of life. They solved the supply problem. They provided raw materials that early Earth couldn't efficiently produce. They turned an improbable event into something merely unlikely. And on planetary timescales, unlikely events happen constantly. You just need to wait. The evidence keeps accumulating. Not just from comets we visited, but from meteorites, from interstellar chemistry, from laboratory experiments. All of it pointing toward the same conclusion. The building blocks of life aren't rare. They're common. They form naturally in cold environments. They survive delivery to planetary surfaces. They accumulate. They react. They experiment. What's rare isn't the chemistry. It's the conditions that let chemistry become biology. Stable liquid water. Energy sources. Mineral surfaces for catalysis. Protection from radiation. Enough time without catastrophic disruption. Those conditions are specific. Not impossible, but requiring a particular combination of planetary characteristics. Earth had those characteristics. Maybe other planets do too. Maybe they're common. Maybe they're rare. We're only beginning to survey the possibilities. Only beginning to understand how many Earth-like worlds exist. Only beginning to look for biosignatures, chemical signs that biology is happening somewhere else. The search is underway. Telescopes scanning exoplanet atmospheres for oxygen, methane, combinations that suggest life. Probes examining Europa and Enceladus, moons with subsurface oceans that might harbor biology. Future missions to Venus, Mars, Titan, looking for current life or fossil evidence of past life. Each mission refines our understanding. Each discovery adjusts the probabilities. And those probabilities matter. Because they determine whether we're alone or part of something larger. Whether life's origin was a singular miracle or a common occurrence. Whether intelligence is unique to Earth or inevitable given enough time. Whether we're the only species capable of asking these questions or one of many scattered across the galaxy. We don't have those answers yet. But we're closer than we've ever been. Closer to understanding our origins. Closer to knowing whether life elsewhere exists. Closer to determining our place in the universe. Not through philosophy or speculation, but through data. Through chemistry. Through missions that touch these ancient objects and read their composition. Comets are messengers. Not from gods or fate, but from the early solar system. They carry information about conditions 4.5 billion years ago. About chemistry in the outer regions. About what was available when Earth formed. That information is still readable, still preserved in ice that hasn't melted since the solar system's beginning. Every comet we study refines the picture. Every measurement adds detail. Every discovery adjusts our understanding. We're not guessing anymore about what these objects contain. We're measuring it directly. And what we're measuring consistently shows organic complexity. Amino acids. Nucleobases. Phosphorus. Water. Everything life needs. That doesn't prove comets created life. Proof would require showing the mechanism, demonstrating that delivered organics actually assembled into something living. We can't do that. We weren't there. We don't have recordings. We have only evidence, circumstantial but compelling, pointing toward cometary delivery as a crucial part of life's origin. The alternative is that all of this is coincidence. That comets happen to carry exactly the molecules life uses, but contributed nothing. That early Earth independently synthesized everything despite having the wrong atmospheric chemistry. That the timing of heavy bombardment and life's appearance is unrelated. Possible, but increasingly implausible. Science works by eliminating alternatives until only one explanation fits the data. We're not there yet. But we're moving in that direction. Each study, each mission, each experiment narrows the possibilities. And what's emerging is a story where life's origin wasn't purely terrestrial. Where Earth's chemistry was supplemented by cosmic delivery. where our existence depended on objects formed in a cold dark carrying cargo across billions of kilometers. It's a strange story, not the one we expected. But data doesn't care about expectations. It cares about what actually happened. And what appears to have happened is that life's ingredients came from space. Not all of them, but enough to matter. Enough to tip the balance from impossible to merely improbable. Enough to give chemistry the raw materials it needed to begin experimenting with biology. We're the result of that experiment. Not the only possible result, but one that worked. One that survived. One that eventually became capable of looking back and asking where it came from. And now we have an answer, partial but growing more complete. We came from Earth, yes. But Earth came from the solar system. And the solar system provided, through comets, the chemical foundation that made us possible. That foundation is still out there. Still orbiting. Still carrying the same molecules. Still waiting to be studied. Each comet is a time capsule from the solar system's formation. Each one holds clues about conditions back then. About chemistry. About the processes that led to us. We've only examined a handful. Thousands more are accessible. Each one potentially holding new information, new insights, new pieces of the puzzle. The work continues. Missions are being planned to return samples from comets. To land on their surfaces. To drill into their cores and retrieve pristine material that's been frozen since the beginning. Each sample will be analyzed in laboratories with instruments far more sensitive than what existed even a decade ago. Each analysis will reveal more about what comets contain and how those contents relate to biology. We're at the beginning of understanding this connection, not the end. The evidence so far is suggestive, compelling, but incomplete. We need more data, more samples, more experiments, more missions. The story of how comets contributed to life's origin is still being written. But the outline is visible. The general shape is clear. And it's changing how we think about our place in the universe. Because if comets seeded Earth, they're seeding other planets too. If organic delivery is common, then the building blocks of life are widespread. If chemistry can transition to biology given the right conditions, then those conditions might exist elsewhere. The universe might be full of experiments similar to the one that produced us. Some failing, some succeeding, some just beginning, some already billions of years old. We don't know yet, but we're looking. And every year, our tools get better. Our understanding deepens. Our search expands. The question of whether we're alone is becoming answerable. Not through speculation, but through observation. Through detecting biosignatures on distant worlds. Through finding life in our own solar system beyond Earth. Through understanding how common the processes that created us actually are. That understanding starts with comets. With these frozen archives carrying evidence from our beginning. With missions that brave enough to catch up to them, touch them, taste their chemistry. With scientists patient enough to analyze the data, piece together the story, follow wherever the evidence leads. And where it's leading is toward a cosmos more interconnected than we imagined. Where life's origin isn't isolated to individual planets, but involves solar system-wide processes. Where chemistry in one region affects biology in another. Where what happens in the cold outer darkness eventually influences what emerges in the warm inner light. We're part of that story. Products of processes that began before Earth existed. Beneficiaries of delivery systems that operated for hundreds of millions of years. Descendants of chemistry that started in molecular clouds and ended in living cells. The path from there to here was long, improbable, contingent on countless specific events. But it happened. And understanding how it happened changes everything about how we see ourselves and our origins.